She came back to Port Harcourt in a leased van, smelling of river water and cold storage, wearing boots her children had never seen before. Her daughter did not recognize her face. Her son did not run to her. They stood in the doorway of Mama Ejiro's compound and stared at this woman like she was a stranger who had borrowed their mother's eyes. She had been gone for 13 months. Nobody knew where she went. Nobody knew what she did while she was there. Not even her children. Not until many years later, when they sat beside her on a veranda in GRA, and she finally told them everything from the beginning.
Ngozi Pepel was 7 years old the first time she understood that love could simply vanish without warning, the way the lights go in a Port Harcourt power pot, present, then absent, leaving only the shape of the room behind in darkness. Her mother's name was Adaeze. She was a small woman who wore her wrapper tight around her chest and laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them. She sold akara at the junction by the church in Romoola every morning from 5 until the last ball was gone, and she always came home with a little something, a chin-chin twist for Ngozi, a biscuit, sometimes just a mango she had saved from her own lunch. That was how Ngozi knew she was loved, not through words, not through declarations, but through mangoes, through a woman who thought of her daughter's mouth when her own stomach was empty. Adaeze died in the rainy season of 1999 on a wet road between Romoola and the bus park, killed by a danfo whose driver had spent the previous night drinking ogogoro in a zinc bar behind the market. The vehicle did not even stop. Someone found her wrapper tangled in the gutter. Someone else sent a message to the compound. Ngozi's father, Benson Pepel, received the news sitting on a plastic chair in the courtyard and did not speak for 3 days. What Benson did next was not grieving, it was disappearing. He stopped bathing, he stopped walking his generator repair stall. He drank from early afternoon until he fell. He took a second wife, a younger woman named Christy, from Elele, within 18 months, not because he had moved forward, but because he needed someone to cook while he was drinking. Christy was 23, hard-faced and efficient, and she did not come to this household to mother another woman's child. She came to manage a man and extract what she could from him, and she was honest about this in the way only people who have nothing to hide ever are. For Ngozi, the years between 8 and 17 were years of invisibility. She cooked before school, she washed after school, she fetched water on Saturdays, she ironed Christy's dresses. She was never beaten, Christy was not that kind of woman, but she was spoken to only when there was work to have sign, corrected loudly when the work was wrong, and given silence so complete when there was nothing to correct that she sometimes pressed her ear against the wall at night just to hear the compound noises and confirm she still existed. But Ngozi had something that the silence could not reach. She had numbers. She could calculate in her head before the teacher finished writing the sum on the board. She counted things without meaning to. The number of kegs of water she carried per day, the cost of a bag of rice divided by the number of cups it would yield, the number of days until her father's drinking money would run out based on how fast he was going through it. The numbers were company. The numbers were the one place no one could dismiss her. She made it to SS3 on the strength of a church scholarship her mother's pastor quietly arranged after Adaeze died. She had plans. She told them to nobody because there was nobody to tell. She wrote them in the margin of a mathematics notebook. University, accounting, a job in the city, a room of her own. Simple things, big things. The ordinary, extraordinary wishes of a girl who had been given nothing and had therefore learned to want everything quietly.
I know you've been enjoying my stories. Kindly support us by liking, commenting, sharing, and following us on our TikTok and YouTube. Let's get back to the story.
His name was Kenneth Ibifuro Amadi. He was 31, drove a Camry that was cleaner than any car Ngozi had ever seen, and worked at the LMA refinery in some capacity that her father described in tones reserved for the names of great men. He was from Buguma, Kalabari, Ijao. He had come to buy a generator from Benson's stall, the store that had been sitting dormant for 3 years, still stocked, cobwebbed at the corners. And somehow, in the conversation that followed, Ngozi's name had entered the negotiation. Ngozi was not asked. This was not an oversight. It was a system. The conversation happened, the decision was reached, and then one evening her father called her to the parlor and told her that Kenneth was a serious man who had expressed interest, and that she should think carefully about the opportunity before her. Christy was in the corner ironing a dress. She did not look up. This told Ngozi everything about who had arranged this meeting and what had been promised in exchange. She said no twice. The first time, her father told her she did not understand what life looked like for a girl with no money and no connections. The second time, Christy told her she was being stupid, that men like Kenneth did not look twice at girls from compounds like theirs, that she should thank God someone saw something in her. The third time Ngozi tried to speak her objection, her father walked out of the room, and she understood that the conversation was over, that her no had been heard and set aside, the way you set aside a paper cup after the water is finished. They were married in a small traditional ceremony at Christmas, 2009. Ngozi was 18. She had not yet sat for JAMB. Her mathematics notebook, the one with her plans written in the margin, stayed behind in the compound when she moved into Kenneth's flat in Rumo Okuta. She forgot it in the packing. She did not realize until she was already gone that she had left her plans behind. The lies arrived on a schedule. The refinery job was not permanent. It was casual labor, renewed by contract, renewed again, then quietly not renewed. The Camry was borrowed from a cousin. The flat in Rumo Okuta was rented with money he had borrowed from a money lender on Agri Road, at interest Ngozi did not know about until the man started appearing at the door. Kenneth was not a bad man in the early months. He was a frightened man pretending to be a large one, which is sometimes harder to live with than cruelty, because it offers no clear thing to fight. Tonye was born in 2011, Boma in 2014. Ngozi loved both children so completely that loving them became a kind of occupation. She organized her entire existence around their feeding schedules, their school fees, the specific way Tonye liked his yam pounded with a little extra water, and the way Boma slept better when there was noise from the next room. The children became the reason she did not leave when the first slap happened in 2015. They became the reason she returned the first time she left in 2017. They became the reason she survived being returned the second time in 2018. But there are limits to what children can be made to carry. They cannot carry the weight of a woman's entire future. Ngozi would learn this too late.
The wrist happened on a Wednesday in March 2019. She had found the other woman's earring behind the bedroom mirror. A small silver hoop, the kind sold at the cosmetics section of Polo Avenue. And she had asked, not shouted, simply asked, because she was tired beyond the energy it takes to shout. Kenneth had been drinking since 3 in the afternoon. He stood from the plastic chair in the parlor and crossed the room in 4 steps and twisted her left wrist with both his hands the way you wring a cloth. She heard the sound before she felt it. She went to Rumola police station at 7 the following morning, her wrist wrapped in a piece of cloth, Boma asleep at Mama Ejiro's, Tonye already in school. The officer who received her looked at her wrapped wrist, looked at her face, and asked what she had done to provoke her husband. She told him she had asked a question. He wrote something on a piece of paper that she was not shown. He told her to sit. She sat for 40 minutes. Then the door opened and Kenneth's eldest brother, Engineer Fidelis Amadi, entered the station in a fresh kaftan, shook hands with the officer behind the desk, and handed over an envelope that was not hidden or disguised in any way. It was placed flat on the desk and pushed across like a bill of sale. The officer looked at Ngozi, then looked at Fidelis Amadi, and told her she could go home now and settle this matter as a family. She went home. She did not know where else to go. 2 weeks later, she came back from Mama Ejiro's compound to find the lock on her own door changed. Kenneth's girlfriend, a girl named Sandra, 22, with processed hair and new shoes, was standing in her kitchen eating the eba she had left on the fire. Kenneth was in the parlor with his shirt off, watching football, with the specific certainty of a man who has rehearsed this moment. He told Ngozi that his name was on the rent agreement and that she needed to collect her things. The pot of soup was still on the cooker. She had made ofe onugbu, the way her mother used to make it, slow and dark and smelling of crayfish and ogiri. She had made enough for 3 days. She picked it up, still warm, still covered, and she carried it out. She carried it past the gate, past the compound wall, out to the street where Tonye and Boma were standing with 2 school bags between them. She stood on that road holding a warm pot of soup with nowhere to go, and for the first time in her adult life, she made no calculation at all. There was nothing left to count.
I know you've been enjoying my stories. Kindly support us by liking, commenting, sharing, and following us on our TikTok and YouTube. Let's get back to the story.
Benson Pepple opened the gate himself. He looked at his daughter, at her 2 children behind her, at the pot she was still holding, and he did not step back to let her in. Christy appeared at his shoulder, like she had been listening from the window. She said without raising her voice, "We cannot start this trouble in this house. We have our own problems." Benson looked at the ground. That was the entire conversation.
the gate closed. She went to her mother's only surviving sister, Auntie Ngeke in Rumuokoro, who had a one-room apartment above a provision store and 2 grandchildren already sleeping in it. Auntie Ngeke wept when she saw Ngozi and held her for a long time without speaking. Then she pulled back and said quietly, with the specific grief of a woman who genuinely has nothing left to give, "I have 4,000 naira to my name, Ngozi. 4,000 naira. You cannot stay here, but I am not chasing you." She pressed the 4,000 naira into Ngozi's hand and went back inside. With 4,000 naira, a pot of soup and 2 children, Ngozi rented a corner in a Face Me, I Face You compound in Rumuokoro for 800 naira a week, a space barely large enough to lie down in, shared with a woman named Mama Ejiro, who sold groundnuts at the bus park, and who turned out to be, in the way of unexpected people, the first true kindness Ngozi would receive in that season of her life. Mama Ejiro's name would become the name Ngozi trusted with her children when everything else collapsed again. The weeks that followed were weeks of subtraction. She washed clothes by hand for a woman in the next compound for 500 naira per load. She peeled egusi at a market women's cooperative for 300 naira per session. She carried blocks once on a construction site for 700 naira and could not lift her arms above her head for 2 days afterward. The children ate once a day when the money was thin. She told them they were fasting for God. Tonye was 9 and believed her. Boma was 6 and did not. She slept on a mat and let the children share the one iron bed in the corner. She did not sleep well. She spent the dark hours calculating 2,400 naira a week for rent, roughly 1,500 naira for food for 3 people if she was careful. Tonye's school fees already 3 months behind. The numbers had always been her comfort, but now they were her tormentors. They kept showing her a gap that had no solution inside it.
The compound flooded on the 3rd night of the November rains. It was the kind of flooding Port Harcourt people know. Not gradual, not announced. Just suddenly there at 2 in the morning, the water already at ankle height on the concrete floor and still rising. Ngozi woke to Boma crying and Tonye shaking her arm. She grabbed them both and stood on the bed. Boma had been coughing for 4 days. Not a serious cough, or rather, not what Ngozi had let herself believe was a serious cough, because believing it was serious would have required 12,000 naira at minimum for a clinic visit and medication, and 12,000 naira was 2 weeks of food. She had given him warm water with salt and told herself she would take him on Friday when the wash payment came in. It was Tuesday. The flood drove them out to the corridor, then to the open compound, where 12 people stood in the rain from 2 until 5 in the morning while the water found its level. Boma was in her arms the whole time, soaked through, burning against her chest. She could feel his temperature through the wet fabric of her blouse. She prayed in a whisper, the way her mother used to pray, not asking, just talking, just telling God what was happening, as if he might have missed it. She got him to a pharmacy at 6 when it opened. The pharmacist looked at him over the counter and said she needed a hospital, not a pharmacy. She took AKK to Braithwaite Memorial, but they turned her away at the emergency desk when the deposit could not be produced. She sat in that corridor with Boma in her lap for 2 hours, while she called every number in her phone. Auntie Ngubeke had nothing. Mama Ejiro was at the bus park and could loan her 2,000 naira, which was not enough. A church member she barely knew transferred 1,500 naira after 20 minutes of back and forth. She took him to a private clinic on Choba Road, where a young doctor, barely older than her, looked at Boma with an expression she recognized, as the face people make when they have already calculated the outcome and are trying to decide how to say it. Boma had severe pneumonia. He had had it for longer than 4 days. His oxygen saturation was critical. She spent 3 nights at that clinic sleeping on a bench outside the ward, eating nothing, borrowing money she could not repay, praying in a voice that got quieter each night, as if she was not sure anymore that anyone was listening. On the 4th morning, she fell asleep on the bench at 4 a.m. She woke to a nurse's hand on her shoulder. She looked at the nurse's face. She already knew. Boma Pepple died at 4:47 a.m. on the 18th of November 2019. He was 6 years old. He had slept with his mother's wrapper for comfort every night since she left him briefly at Mama Ejiro's, and the wrapper was in the room with him when he died, because a nurse had placed it there after finding it in the bag Ngozi had packed. He was buried in his small ceremony in Rumuokoro 2 days later, because there was no money for anything larger, and Ngozi stood at the graveside in the same clothes she had been wearing for 3 days and did not cry. She had no more crying left. She was empty of everything.